The German Panzer has collapsed once again on the world's biggest stage, bowing out in the round of 32 against Paraguay. Die Mannschaft was sent packing after a brutal penalty shootout, continuing a dark era for the former champions. Ever since their golden moment in Brazil back in 2014, the story of German football has been a relentless, painful freefall. In 2018, while sitting comfortably at #1 in the world rankings, they took a stunning slap to the face from South Korea and vanished in the group stage. 4 years later in Qatar, the exact same script played out as they fell to Japan. Truthfully, the opening of this year's tournament looked incredibly bright after they demolished Curaçao 7-0, pushing their all-time World Cup goal tally to 239 and making Germany the highest-scoring nation in the history of the tournament. But that flash of glory vanished in an instant. A suffocating match against Ivory Coast was only salvaged by a 90-minute winner, and by the final group game against Ecuador, they actually threw away a lead to lose. That sluggish, fragile performance left fans shivering with doubt. Even though they advanced as group leaders, a dark cloud of anxiety hung over the stadium. Everyone tried to brush it off, assuming a powerhouse like Germany would surely handle Paraguay. But a harsh reality proved them completely wrong. This defeat cuts twice as deep, because Germany used to be the undisputed kings of the penalty shootout, boasting a perfect 4-4-4 record and netting an incredible 18 out of 19 spot kicks. Now, that proud history has shattered into pieces. The atmosphere back home is tense enough to snap a wire. Team legend Matthias wasted no time exposing deep fractures inside the dressing room, while former manager Klinsmann bitterly called the result an absolute disgrace. Veteran goalkeeper Neuer, who had just reversed his international retirement to return, immediately announced he was walking away from the national team for good the moment the final whistle blew. In stark contrast to the heartbreak, manager Nagelsmann maintained an eerie, detached arrogance. He boldly told the press he was no runaway coward and flatly refused to resign, a move that poured gasoline on the fire and whipped public fury into an absolute frenzy. The German Football Association was forced to cancel the tactician's press conference and has already begun drawing up plans for his termination. Over in South Korea, fans are actively comparing him to the most controversial figures in their own football history, as the chaotic state of both football nations right now shares far too many striking resemblances. This is a country that stands as a true titan of the sport, wearing 4 proud stars on their chest. Yet 12 long years have passed without Germany keeping a single clean sheet at the World Cup. Even worse, they haven't tasted a single victory in the knockout rounds across the last 3 tournaments. What on earth has happened to this giant? This collapse was no freak accident. The second the squad list was announced, heavy clouds of skepticism rolled in. Looking at names like Neuer, Wirtz, Kimmich, Musiala, and Havertz, anyone would think this lineup should coast into the quarterfinals or semi-finals at the very least. But to place them in the conversation of true title contenders was an absolute luxury. If we ask ourselves honestly whether this group had what it takes to lift the golden trophy, the answer becomes incredibly bleak. The squad is weighed down by 3 massive fractures, none more severe than the shocking decline in form among its star players. Look no further than Musiala. Back in the 2024 European Championship, he set the stadiums on fire with 3 goals, hailed as a world-class dribbler and the future savior of German football. Yet, after suffering ankle and calf injuries during his club tournament last year, that explosive energy has completely vanished. Throughout this entire tournament, those sharp runs that used to tear defenses apart, and those moments of pure creative magic were practically non-existent, utterly failing the expectations of the fans. To make matters worse, his attacking partner Wirtz also had a completely invisible World Cup. While he looked slightly more alive, compared to his recent struggles in the English Premier League, he still couldn't break down opposing lines by himself. His greatest strength has always been connecting with and feeding the players around him. He is simply not the type of lone savior who can carry a team and flip a match on its head. The simultaneous collapse of this duo was a fatal blow to the German attack. Beyond the crisis of form, a relentless wave of injuries has absolutely decimated the former champions. The frontline of Bayern Munich took the heaviest beating. Gnabry, who was flying high, went down right before the tournament, and young talent Lennart Karl was cruelly left at home. In Germany, Karl was widely seen as a beacon of hope due to his sheer pace and chaotic energy. The exact ingredients this rigid squad desperately lacked. Losing these tactical weapons left the coaching staff completely empty-handed when trying to change the game from the bench. As a result, their attacking play became painfully predictable, with every single combination easily read and snuffed out by opposing defenders. The misery compounded when their towering target man Kalajdzic suffered a long-term injury, stripping the team of their traditional aerial route to goal. The backline suffered an identical fate when left-footed centre-back Schlotterbeck went down against Ivory Coast and was ruled out for the rest of the tournament. This was a loss they simply could not recover from. With his gifted left foot and exceptional long-range passing, he was the launchpad for every single attack. In the past, whenever a match needed composure and rhythm, Toni Kroos would step up and carry the weight. But ever since that brilliant midfielder walked away from the game, the backline has looked completely lost. The young pair in the center of the pitch, Pavlovic and Nmeka, tried their absolute best, but their natural instinct is not to dictate the tempo or distribute the ball safely under pressure. With the massive burden of building play from the back, falling squarely on Schlotterbeck, his sudden absence turned German possession into something incredibly stagnant and painful to watch. Ultimately, the deepest issue is that the sheer quality of the squad has eroded significantly compared to the past. Germany once placed immense hope in the crop of players born in the mid-90s, famously crowning them the Golden Generation. Names like Werner Draxler, Sewell Goretzka, Brandt, and Mayer were universally praised by European scouts as generational talents during their youth. By all accounts, this should have been the exact moment they reached total maturity to steady the ship and lead the nation. Instead, reality delivered a brutal reality check. Not a single one of them developed into the player everyone expected. The very spine that should have been the strongest part of the team was left completely hollow, causing their competitive edge to plummet as a natural consequence. Even with a dozen excuses, fans refuse to swallow this pill. They are furious that a giant like Germany couldn't even survive the round of 32 right now. Every single ounce of public rage is pointed at one man, the young manager, Julian Nagelsmann. The wave of criticism at home has reached a boiling point, with people branding him a national embarrassment and demanding he step down immediately. No one can deny that Nagelsmann had a stellar rise. Ever since his days managing Leipzig, he was celebrated as a tactical prodigy and became the most hunted signature in Europe. However, a bleak chapter at Bayern Munich, followed by this humiliating disaster with the national team, has brought him crashing. Down to earth, fans have highlighted 3 massive blunders by the skipper, starting with his incredibly stubborn player selection. The decision to keep writing Leroy Sané's name into the starting 11 has become a massive source of public fury. Anyone can see the winger's form hit rock bottom ages ago, and he has long lost his grip on a starting spot, even at his own club. Despite scratching out a goal against Ecuador, Sané squandered a mountain of clear-cut chances across the 3 group stage matches. The absolute low point came against Paraguay, where his dribble success rate and crossing accuracy both sat at a flat 0%, while his duel success rate barely scraped 11%. Despite being the worst player on the pitch, he was coddled out there until the 88th minute. Looking at it objectively, this situation also exposes a grim truth. The coaching staff simply had no better options, proving that Germany's squad depth on the wings is a shadow of its former self. During their golden era from the late 2000s to the mid-2010s, they possessed an endless supply of elite attacking midfielders like Podolski, Thomas Müller, Cyril Götze, Ruse, and Ozil, players who always knew how to produce a goal from nothing when the team was stuck. Today, Wirtz, Musiala, and Sané clearly lack that kind of weight. Even so, the anger toward Nagelsmann hasn't quieted down, because instead of trusting young talent Lulling when Sané cratered, he chose to double down on his own stubbornness. To make matters worse, explosive wingers like Ademi and Almala were ruthlessly cut from the squad before the tournament even began. The entire argument circles back to the exact same starting point. The squad selection was flawed from day one. The handling of Kimmich is another textbook example of this mismanagement. Throughout the tournament, he was shoved into the right-back slot, but the real issue is that the coaching staff failed to call up a single natural right-back as a backup. Meanwhile, at Bayern Munich, Kimmich has been thriving in central midfield, right next to Pavlovic. That partnership had been proven all season long, making the manager's stubbornness in breaking them up for the national team completely baffling to the public. The inevitable result was a midfield that lost all its steel and completely surrendered control of the tempo. Furthermore, dragging a 31-year-old Kimmich out to the flank turned him into a massive liability in terms of pace. When matched up against the opposition's explosive wingers, he was completely left in the dust, directly offering the enemy a clear path to goal. The backlash has been fierce, with critics asking why a versatile asset like Tom Bischoff wasn't selected. Forcing an ill-fitted player into a rigid system was an immense mistake. The second massive blunder was a total lack of clear tactical direction. The national team environment is vastly different from a club. Short international breaks require a leader who can unlock the natural strengths of individuals to build collective power, not someone who crams overly complicated theories down their throats. Yet, Nagelsmann let his own ego blind him, forcing experiments that far exceeded his players' current capabilities. This imbalance was painfully obvious on the left flank, where defender Brown was ordered to tuck inside like an inverted fullback. In a tragic twist of irony, winger Wirtz, playing directly ahead of him, wanted to occupy the exact same space, causing the two players to constantly step on each other's toes and completely paralyze that side of the attack. Many experts noted that utilizing a traditional winger who could hold the line and whip in crosses would have been infinitely more effective. This impoverished approach played out again during the clash with Paraguay. Despite starting the strike duo of Undav and Havertz, the service into the penalty box was completely devoid of any real danger. They controlled 76% of the ball and broke the World Cup record for the most completed passes in a single half. Yet they became the first team in history to walk into the halftime break trailing on the scoreboard. A striker like Undav can only come alive when he has green grass to run into. The moment the opposition parks the bus and sits deep, his strengths are completely neutralized. Havertz was forced to constantly drop deep just to hunt for the ball, leaving the opponent's box entirely vacant. In such a stagnant bottleneck, the failure to introduce a towering presence like Waldemar early on remains a massive question mark, especially since their solitary equalizer came from the simplest formula available. A cross from Wirtz for Havertz to attack with a header. The toxic combination of rigid tactics, stubborn selections, and agonizingly slow adjustments from the manager has left fans completely hollowed out. This chaotic breakdown shares far too many parallels with the current mess in South Korean football. To cap it all off, Nagelsmann pulling reliable penalty takers like Wirtz and Rudiger off the pitch right before the shootout proved that the manager himself was the one who pulled the trigger on his own team's demise. Ultimately, the heaviest and most fatal issue lies squarely in the manager's leadership style and his handling of the group. Not long ago, Nagelsmann himself drew a hard line in the sand, publicly stating that Neuer's chapter with the national team was permanently closed. Yet, when push came to shove, he tore up his own promise and called the veteran keeper back. The real problem was that the communication inside the camp was incredibly muddy, leaving a rock-solid figure like Baumann, who had been phenomenal throughout qualifying, to sit on the bench for the biggest tournament on earth. This blatant unfairness also saw young talent Erbig ruthlessly tossed out of the final squad entirely. On top of that, the manager's media appearances have been a constant source of controversy. The moment they were eliminated, he immediately blamed the officiating before turning around to publicly drag Undav in front of the press, complaining that the forward should have clinical finishes in those final moments. This cowardly act of shifting blame instantly reminds the public of the empty apologies offered by South Korean football executives after every disaster. In a twist of supreme irony, Undav was actually the lone bright spot for the German attack this year, netting 3 goals. This cowardice, this desperate scramble to evade the media's axe, caused the tactician to trip over his own words constantly. He rambled to reporters that Germany is no longer an elite force, that he will not resign, and that he will hold onto the hot seat until the public no longer needs him, statements that run completely counter to what the entire nation wants. The fury among fans has officially breached the limit, forcing technical director Rudi Völler, a man who had consistently acted as Nagelsmann's shield, to completely shift his stance under immense public pressure. The decision to fire the young manager is now purely a matter of time. It is a simple truth that when your body is completely drained, your brain cannot function well enough to make sharp decisions. I am fighting off a wave of sleepiness right now as I record this after lunch is crashing down on the highest offices, demanding a total top-to-bottom purge of the German Football Association. This scene is an exact mirror of the current chaos gripping South Korean football. The truth is, this tragedy was predicted long ago. It was no sudden accident, but rather the result of the association repeating the exact same blunders over and over. 2 years ago, during the European Championship on home soil, even though they fell to Spain, the team's performance and fighting spirit were highly praised as a beacon of hope for the future. Yet, during this World Cup, that entire inheritance was completely squandered, leaving absolutely no room for excuses. What infuriates the public most is that the association has consistently chosen blind compromise, just like when they kept Joachim Low in his seat after the historic disaster on Russian soil in 2018, or when they continued to trust Hansi Flick after a dismal group stage exit in Qatar in 2022. Both of those stubborn decisions led to catastrophic endings. So, looking at the situation now, continuing to coddle Nagelsmann cannot possibly be the right choice. Furthermore, the fault does not lie solely with the dugout. It rests on the shoulders of an entire squad that completely lacked a true leader. The decision to bring Neuer back was supposed to patch over the team's lack of mental steel, but the moment they entered that high-stakes penalty shootout, that fatal weakness lay completely exposed. The tragedy isn't just that they missed their shots. It is the shameful reality that a string of senior players like Anton Braun and Goretzka completely shirked away from the responsibility. That cowardice forced center-back Jonathan Tah, a man who had never taken a single penalty in his professional career, to step up and ultimately crumble under the weight of the moment. Fans can understand the fear gripping the defenders, but for an experienced midfielder like Goretzka, refusing to step up twice despite the desperate pleas of Captain Kimmich is completely inexcusable. In the absolute life-or-death moment of the match, not a single soul wearing that white jersey had the courage to shoulder the fate of the nation. In the end, every single person chose to turn their back to escape the pressure. This defeat dragged Germany's long-ignored structural decay into the bright light of day. A succession of managers have all failed to solve the exact same riddle: how to unlock a traditional number 9 striker. One could argue that the country currently lacks a world-class penalty box predator like Klose in his prime. Yet, the reality is they were never short on towering target men who could fight in the box. In 2018, they had Mario Gomez. In 2022, they had Fuelkrug, and in this tournament, they had Waldemar, a player possessing incredible height. Yet, Nagelsmann chose to freeze this option out, placing his faith in Undav and Havertz, neither of whom are natural focal points in the box. The result was complete helplessness when the opponent sat deep, as the coaching staff had voluntarily abandoned their aerial route. The young manager's lack of tactical depth is drawing heavy fire from experts. In the old days, the mere mention of the German Panzer evoked images of sheer physical power and devastating aerial bombardments that would crush opponents in times of trouble. Today, that proud identity has completely vanished. Even more alarming is the severe brain drain hitting German football, as a string of elite young talents holding dual citizenship are choosing to pledge their futures to other nations. Ken Uzun chose to wear the colors of Turkey, Stanisic aligned with Croatia, while Bakayoko chose Austria and Maz selected Albania. These were all players who grew up in the German system and were fully eligible, yet the association's incredibly sloppy approach caused them to walk away. The media is heavily condemning the executives for allowing the future of the nation to slip into the hands of direct competitors. Even in the case of Ense, a player who came through every single youth tier from U17 to U21, the coaching staff was completely powerless to unlock even 10% of his ability on the pitch, a reality that leaves a massive amount of regret. The failure of the 90s generation to mature, the total lack of explosive wingers who can stretch the pitch, and the deep fatigue inside the youth development system, these are all accurate diagnoses. Yet, the root cause of this entire tragedy boils down to a single issue. The manager was entirely too stubborn with his own abstract theories, while the association fell asleep at the wheel, drunk on their 2014 glory, completely missing the golden window to execute a thorough rebuild. The sentence for that stagnation is 3 consecutive World Cup disasters in 2018, 2022, and 2026, with the Germans tasting the exact same bitter script every single time. Every major media outlet at home is screaming that simply changing the man in the dugout will not fix the root of the problem. What is required is a total cleansing of the executive suites at the German Football Association. Right now, the name carrying the heaviest weight of public expectation to take over the hot seat is Jurgen Klopp. Multiple reliable sources indicate that the high command of German football is aggressively chasing his signature, and the veteran tactician himself has expressed genuine interest in leading the national team. Whether Klopp's arrival can lift this giant out of the mud for future tournaments remains to be seen. In your opinion, what was the absolute biggest reason behind the total collapse of German football in this tournament? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you found today's tactical breakdown and story engaging, don't forget to hit subscribe and support the channel.